Larry Lessig is a professor at Harvard, and he is one of the leading advocates, I think the godfather really of the campaign finance reform movement. He wants to get money out of politics, as a lot of us do. Of course, we work on Wolfpack, and he's got Root Strikers. And recently he gave a brilliant speech at TED. It's actually near 1 million views. You should check it out. And I want to show you what he said because I think it's incredibly important to the country. So he talked about, can you imagine if there was a place called Lesterland, where before everybody else voted, only guys named one name. Now it could be anything. It could be JR, it could be Bob. He picked the name Lester, right? That only the Lesters voted. And then after they were done voting, they would pick the candidates and the rest of us would get the vote. Well, wouldn't that so? Why? Why do they get that unfair advantage? And you begin to realize that that's terrible. And then, of course, he points this out.
What can we say about democracy in Lesterland? Well, we can say, number one, as the Supreme Court said in Citizens United, the people have the ultimate influence over elected officials. Because after all, there is a general election. But only after the Lesters have had their way with the candidates who wish to run in the general election. And number two, obviously, this dependence upon the Lesters is going to produce a subtle, understated, we could say camouflaged bending to keep the Lesters happy. Okay, so we have a democracy, no doubt, but it's dependent upon the Lesters and dependent upon the people. It has a competing dependencies, we could say conflicting dependencies, depending upon who the Lesters are.
All right, stop right there for a second. James Madison said we should be dependent on the people alone. Why are we having a separate election, basically the money election in our case in the United States of America, where these guys get to decide who the candidates are before we even get the vote? And of course, that's where Professor Lessig was going. So let's watch the next part of the speech.
Now, there are three things I want you to see now that I've described Lesterland. Number one, the United States is Lesterland. The United States is Lesterland. The United States also looks like this, also has two elections. One we call the general election. The second we should call the money election. In the general election, it's the citizens who get to vote if you're over 18, in some states if you have an ID. In the money election, it's the funders who get to vote. The funders who get to vote. And just like in Lesterland, the trick is to run in the general election, you must do extremely well. In the money election, you don't necessarily have to win. There is Jerry Brown, but you must do extremely well. And here's the key. There are just as few relevant funders in USA land as there are Lesters in Lesterland. Now you say, really? Really? 0.05%?
Well, we're going to get to that. That's, of course, the number of Lesters in America, the 0.05%. But before we get there, look, I had a friend who was very seriously considering running for Congress. When he went to go meet with Democrats, and he's a Democrat, they never asked him what any of his policy positions were. They only asked him, how much money can you raise? And when he explained that he actually could raise a decent amount of money, he immediately became one of the leading candidates. They even had him talk to the governor of the state. And in all those different meetings, they never once asked, where do you stand on the issues? Because that's not what's relevant in the first election, the money election that Professor Lessig is talking about there. We don't even get a choice in terms of who we're going to vote on, because only the people that are either incredibly rich or know a lot of rich people are allowed to run. I mean, remember that when we set up this democracy, it was supposed to be that the farmers could run, the average guy was supposed to be able to run. You think right now an average plumber, a gardener, do you think a gardener could run for office? Of course not. Where the hell is he going to get the millions of dollars for? But in a democracy, he should be able to do that. We should have free and fair elections where any of us can be the representatives of the people. But the reality is we're nowhere near that. And of course, the first question he asked, what do the Lesters want in the Lester election? What do the funders want in America? They're not interested in their health. They're also usually not even interested in their ideology. They're usually interested on three letters. ROI stands for return on investment. They invest on the politicians to get a return back. Usually that return is very, very healthy. Now, let's get to the portion of the speech where Professor Lessig explains how few funders actually control all of our politics.
Well, here are the numbers from 2010. 0.26% of America gave $200 or more to any federal candidate. 0.05% gave the maximum amount to any federal candidate. 0.01%, the 1% of the 1%, gave $10,000 or more to federal candidates. And in this election cycle, my favorite statistic is 0.000042%. For those of you doing the numbers, you know that's 132 Americans gave 60% of the super PAC money spent in the cycle we have just seen ending.
132 Americans gave 60% of the money. And believe me, have 60% of the influence over our politicians. That's what we call a democracy? Please check out the whole speech. It is absolutely brilliant. It's on Ted's website. And whatever you do, if it's Root Strikers or any other group, or it's Wolfpack at wolf-pack.com, join any of those groups to fight back. As Professor Lessig often says, you need many people striking at the root of the problem, which is money in politics, from all the different angles until we take the problem down. Because if we don't, we have lost our republic. We need to ride to make sure that we regain it. Together we can do it. You've got to find out what the problem is first, though. Check out his brilliant speech.